The internet is cracked, the show that asks the question, can we coexist with our creation?
Hello, I am Seth Camillo.
And I am Caroline Risberg, and we are The Internet is Cracked by Addicts for Addicts.
And today we are very lucky to have Cory Doctorow with us. He is an author, journalist, activist, and just all around big mind when it comes to technology. And we really, frankly, are very lucky to be talking to him.
Oh,
And so before we start with the questioning, we want to allow you to be able to say, Picks and Shovels, your new book.
sure.
Where and when can we get it?
Sure. So this is my next novel. It's called Picks and
Mhm.
Shovels. It's
Yes.
part of a series of books, although it's a standalone novel. It's a part of a series of books about a sleuth, a high-tech forensic accountant who has spent 40 years in Silicon Valley busting tech bro scams. And this is his first adventure. It's set in the 1980s in the era of the AIDS crisis and Ronald Reagan and the dead Kennedys and the weird PC. Back when anyone knew what PCs were for, or who was supposed to make them, or who was supposed to use them, or what they were supposed to do with them, or even what they were supposed to look like. And Marty's first job in the 1980s, fresh out of a CPA program, is working for a weird PC company that turns out to be a scam. It's run by a Mormon bishop, a Catholic priest, and an Orthodox rabbi, and it's a faith scam. It preys on faith groups through pyramid selling to lock people into buying these third-rate PCs that are completely locked to their ecosystem. So like even the printers, which are fanful printers, have sprockets that have been replaced with slightly wider sprockets so that you have to use their special paper that costs 10 times as much. So sort of Amway on steroids. And he figures out he's working for the wrong side. He switches sides and goes to work for some ex-employees of these three men who call themselves the Reverend Sirs, who have devoted their lives to unlocking all the people who've been locked in, to modding those printers and computers and floppy drives and software so that you can just use them with regular stuff and you're not stuck paying rent to these three grifters for the rest of your life. And they are an Orthodox woman who's been ostracized from her family because she's come out as queer, Mormon woman who's left the faith because of the LDS's opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment, and a nun who's left her order because she's fallen in with the liberation theology movement in Central America during the Dirty Wars. And what they quickly discover is that this isn't just a trade war, that the kind of scam artists who are willing to run this kind of con on their parishioners are not above resorting to spectacular acts of violence to defend that scam. And what starts off as a trade war becomes a shooting war.
It is a great book. Everybody should
Oh,
read it
thank you
or
so
listen
much.
to it. No, it's really, really good.
That's very
I
kind
love
of you.
it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's the truth.
Oh.
All right, so should we start jumping down the little rabbit holes, as I like to say it? So I want to start with a question. As a successful activist, blogger, and journalist, what inspired you to turn to fiction as a way to explore and advance your philosophical ideas?
Well, I started writing fiction almost around this as well, okay. So I wrote my first story when I was 6. I think
Mm.
I went on my first demonstration with my parents when I was an infant. So I was definitely doing political stuff for a few years before I was writing, but it's a close run thing. They've both been a part of my life all my life.
Mm.
When I was 13, I was nearly suspended from middle school for organizing an anti-nuclear proliferation group that our principal, who was a kind of right-wing hawk, didn't like, and he confiscated all of our materials, and we went into his office and stole them back and ended up on the front page of the newspaper. And
So
Yeah.
basically, your activism and your writing are intertwined rather than one coming after or before the
yeah,
other.
they're really coterminal, I would say. And science fiction has got a very long tradition of political activism.
Yeah.
It's not just Orwell, like Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, a
Mm.
nakedly political book. She's basically writing in the era of the Luddite uprisings. She was on the side of the Luddites. Her husband had given his maiden speech in the House of Lords defending the Luddites. So she was being very political about the role of technology and labor. William Morris, the philosopher and artist, he was a fantasy writer who wrote socialist fantasy. I mean, this is, politics and genre, to say nothing of the right-wing political figures who've written genre, obviously Ayn Rand. They've always been very closely intertwined.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
And so let's get into your book a little bit.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You talk your main character is navigating the philosophical ideas of technology.
Mhm.
And uh do you think we as a society are doing a good job of that, or are we turning a blind eye and really not navigating the philosophical implications and just accepting technology as it comes without really the average person really paying attention to what each step forward means in terms of our how it affects society?
Well, I think it's a complicated question. Like when we talk about things like content moderation and decisions about what you see and what you don't see, and how spam and harmful content and so on are filtered.
Mhm.
Uh, there is definitely a robust technical discussion that we can have about the systems by which classification takes place. But a lot of those questions are less important than the question of whether or not you get to choose how that system is configured, or whether, if you don't like how that system is configured, you can leave a social media network without enduring a high personal cost of leaving behind people you like. You could not easily leave Facebook without saying goodbye to all the people who matter to you there. And
Right.
Facebook understands that. That's one of the reasons they're so rotten to you. And, you know, there's no technical reason that has to be the case. When Facebook first opened up to the general public, in order to lure users away from MySpace and to spare them the difficult choice of deciding whether they wanted to be on MySpace where their friends were or be on Facebook. One of the things Facebook used to promise in the early 2000s was that
Mhm.
it was like MySpace, except they would never invade your privacy and they would never, data mine you or
Yeah.
sell ads based on your demographics or your behavior. And so they didn't make you choose between that. They gave you a bot. And if you gave that bot your login and password for MySpace, it would pretend to be you and go log into MySpace several times a day. It would grab all the messages waiting in your inbox. It would bring them back to your
Mm.
Facebook inbox, paste them in there. You could reply to them and then push them back out to MySpace. But if you were to do that to Facebook today, like they would sue you until the rubble bounced.
Right.
And, certainly they haven't done anything to facilitate that. And, modern services like Mastodon actually let you hop between servers just, with a couple of mouse clicks where you just like you would hop between, T-Mobile and Verizon, you can go between one Mastodon server and another. And, if someone sends you a message, it just goes to the new server. And if you send a message, it gets seen by all the people who followed you when you were on the old server. And
Mm.
so it means that like when the decisions are made by the people who are doing the content moderation design, that those decisions just don't matter as much, because if they're bad decisions, you can leave very
Uh-huh.
easily, right? The
Right.
decisions that people make when like, it's like the kinds of restaurants and the pricing on the other side of the TSA checkpoint matter a lot more than the pricing in restaurants on this side of the TSA checkpoint. 'Cause it's really easy to go from one to the other. Once you're on the other side of the TSA checkpoint, you're not coming back through. And
Right. Yeah.
so, that this is one of the reasons that no one has ever said, God, I can't believe what great value for money and outstanding food I got at that airport restaurant. It's because once you're captive, once
Mm.
you can't leave, vendors are incentivized to treat you like a captive audience. It's why when prisons get tablets to replace their libraries and their in-person visits and the mail system and packages, why everything on those tablets costs more and is of lower quality, because prisoners can't shop around. And so anytime you're a captive audience, whether that's because you're locked into a platform because your friends are there, or you're locked into your home because moving is expensive and difficult, or
Mhm.
you're literally locked behind bars, the vendors know it and they act accordingly.
So you're talking about basically
Oh.
creating monopoly and
Yeah.
barriers to
Yeah.
entry, artificial barriers to entry.
Yeah, it's as an
Mm.
economist would talk about these as switching costs. This is the things that you have to endure in order to leave one platform and go to another. And one of the monopoly cases against Facebook, they yanked out some memos between the person who was designing the Facebook Photos product and the manager of this Facebook Photos program is saying, Mark, I want you to know that we are going to make this product really good because we want people to put their family photos in it. We know that if leaving means giving up your family photos, that you'll be
Right.
less likely to leave and will stop people from going to Google Plus. They won't want to pay the switching costs of leaving Facebook. And, when it comes to getting your friends to all go somewhere else at the same time, economists call that a collective action problem. And that collective action problem, it's, something we've all experienced because there's maybe 6 people in your group chat and you can't agree on like what movie to see this weekend or what board game to play. And when
Right.
it's you and 200 friends on Facebook, the collective action problem is really hard because some of those people are there because they have the same rare disease as a group and people in a group they're with, and that really matters to them, or because they emigrated from another country and that's how they stay in touch with their family and friends,
Right.
or because that's where their kid's little league team is organizing its carpool and they don't want to pull their kid out of soccer, or because that's how they see their customers, or because they're a performer or creative worker and that's where their audience is. And you add up all the things all those people have to give up if they leave, and also how hard it is for all those people to convince all those other people that they should go, keeping in mind that all those other people also are living in this world. And it becomes really hard to leave Facebook. It's a very sticky product. And once it's a very sticky product, the company knows that they can get away with some really dire misbehavior. No one came down off a stone mountain with 2 stone tablets saying, like, it's illegal to modify Facebook, reverse engineer its app, block its ads, whatever, right? Those are like policy choices we made. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act was signed in 1998, and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was signed in 1986. And, like these are decisions made in living memory by like people whose names we know. We had predictions at the time these decisions were being made about what the likely outcome would be. Those dire predictions largely come true. We should maybe hold those people accountable for ignoring experts who told them that this was a worry. The other thing that I would say about being a sound or smart critic of technology is when you listen to the bullshit that people say about their own products and you go, oh my God, that's terrible. Not that they're lying, but that this claim that they've made is itself terrible. I don't think AI can do my job, but I think an AI salesman might convince my boss to fire me and replace me with AI that can't do my job. And then that makes everyone worse off, right? And when we run
Yeah.
around, we
Yeah.
say AI is going to do your job instead of an unscrupulous AI salesman is going to bullshit your boss into firing you and replacing you with AI that can't do your job. We help that AI salesman sell this crummy product to your boss, because if there's one thing your boss is insatiably horny about, it's firing you and replacing you with software. And so they
Yeah.
are primed
Yeah.
to believe this nonsense. And so if you want to be a good critic of technology, you should be trying to ascertain the truthfulness of these claims. Like Facebook did this thing once where they exposed 60 million people non-consensually to a stimulus that they thought would increase voter turnout. And they called this the voter turnout experiment. They published it in a journal. And they saw a 0.04% increase in voter turnout in the experimental arm of the intervention. Now, on the one hand, this isn't much of an outcome. Like, it is a measurable outcome, but oftentimes with persuasive techniques, they regress to the mean really quickly. Like, if you're a 5-year-old and you see that something costs 99 cents, you may not think that it costs $1. But by the time you're 6, you're like 99 cents and $1 are the same number.
Right.
And in the same way, the first time you see the stimulus on Facebook, it might be like the first time you saw an Upworthy headline that's like 7 amazing things about avocados. You won't believe number 4. And then, like the 10th time you saw that, you're like, number 4 is not going to be that interesting. And you stop clicking on those headlines, right? So maybe Facebook did get an effect out of this, but we should be skeptical that like it's only going to get better from here, that the 0.04% increase in voter turnout, which is like 1 or fewer voters per precinct, which is not winning elections for anyone, that this is going to grow, that they've like discovered the beginning of a ramp that goes straight up to infinity where everyone's going to vote however you tell them to. And on the other hand, we should say, hey, maybe a company that does non-consensual psychological experiments on 60 million people shouldn't be anything, not even a lemonade stand, even if the result itself is being oversold, right? And that is a smart critique of Facebook, as opposed to running around with your hair on fire and going, Facebook has figured out how to win elections with psychological manipulation.
Is there a way to fight back and assert ourselves?
Yeah, this is kind of the good news story, although it's gotten a little more complicated in the last couple of months because of Trump and changes in the EU and changes in the UK. But for the last 5 or 6 years, we have seen more action on competition law and antitrust than we've seen in a couple of generations. It's important to know that we had antitrust law and a pretty robust antitrust enforcement regime from about 1910, 1912 until the late 1970s, which, at the start of the end of the Carter administration, start of the Reagan administration. And during that time, although it wasn't perfect, we mostly kept monopolies at bay. And then there was a kind of radical right-wing economic philosophy that's sometimes called the Chicago School that said that um, monopoly, the right way to think about monopoly is that monopolies, if you find them in the wild, it's because they're efficient. The only monopolies that work are the efficient ones. Otherwise, better companies will just outcompete the monopoly. And so if you find a company that has a durable long run monopoly, right, that is sitting there for a long time monopolizing its market, you should assume that it's because they've done a really good job. Furthermore, that it would be really perverse to use public money and public resources to punish them for like being the product everyone likes. So if you see Google search capturing 90% of the market, you just should assume that they're the best search, and you really shouldn't do anything to penalize them for being the best search. That would be terrible. And moreover, if you see a monopoly that hasn't endured for a long time, right, that's just popped off, you should just adopt a wait and see posture, because either it will be outcompeted, or if it lasts, then it's not bad. But so basically, there's a recipe for doing nothing. And we did that for 40 years. And we got horrific monopolies in every single sector.
Yep.
Like one company makes all the vitamin C, and one
Yeah.
company makes all of the eyeglasses and also owns every eyewear brand you've ever heard of and does all the optics and also owns all the high street optical stores, like Lens Crafters, a company called EssilorLuxottica. They've raised the price of glasses 1,000% in the last decade. And whether you're shopping at Sunglass Hut or shopping at Sears Optical or Target Optical, you're buying from them. Whether you're buying Dolce & Gabbana or Coach or Oakley, you're buying from them. Your lenses come from them. They're the largest insurer. And glasses cost 10 times more than they did a decade ago because of them. There used to be 40 professional wrestling leagues. Now there's one. It's owned by this like rapey Trumpist billionaire. He turned all of his employees into contractors and took away their health insurance. This is why all those beloved wrestlers are like begging for pennies to treat their work-related medical injuries on GoFundMe. And, everywhere you look, there are these horrible monopolies. And, it's not a mysterious phenomenon how this occurred, right? Like there's a kind of bright line between ending anti-monopoly enforcement and getting monopolies. And the economists responsible for this will tell you that no, this is a complex phenomenon driven by the great forces of history. So what happened after 40 years of this is that governments all over the world started to do much more robust anti-monopoly enforcement than we had seen in 2 generations. And
Right.
that's true in the EU. That's
Yeah.
true in the UK. It's true in the US, where under Biden, we saw antitrust enforcement that hadn't
Yeah.
been seen in 40 years, more done in 4 years. In every metric that you want to measure, number of cases brought, number of investigations, number of fines levied, and so on, in 4 years than we'd seen in 40. And you had enforcers bringing out laws like Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act that prohibits unfair and deceptive business practices and really broadly applying them to things like junk fees and non-compete agreements, all these sleazy monopoly tactics. Even China has brought in these really muscular competition laws aimed at their tech companies. And the reason no one could fix a ventilator is one company, Medtronic, bought every single ventilator company in the world, did the largest tax inversion in world history. They pretend that they're an Irish company so they don't have to pay taxes. And then they put locks on the ventilators so that if you repair a ventilator, it won't work until a Medtronic technician types an unlock code into it.
No.
And as a result, during the lockdown, no one could fix their ventilators.
Oh,
And-
that's horrible.
These are the same issue,
Yeah.
right? They're both downstream of monopoly. And people are starting to recognize
Mhm.
that monopolies are hurting them. You're starting to see this groundswell and this solidarity across sectors of people who are angry about monopoly everywhere they find it.
So what about like the like regulators worldwide are finally taking talking about breaking up the big tech and imposing stricter rules of data privacy and AI ethics. Do you think government are moving fast enough to incorporate overreach or regulatory capture, and lobbying always keep them a step behind? What do you think?
Well, I think regulatory capture is definitely moving apace right now. So the Federal Trade Commission, when it switched over to Trump's chair, he
Uh-huh.
canceled a bunch of really important ongoing investigations. So one into predatory pricing. This is when vendors underprice their products below cost until they drive their competitors out of the market and then jack the prices up. And also one into surveillance pricing. This is when vendors use data from data brokers to figure out how much you can pay and then change the price when you go to buy. So, McDonald's has a portfolio company that advertises itself as being able to tell when a regular customer has gotten paid. And on that
Mm.
payday, you can raise the price of their breakfast sandwich by $1.
Mm.
The three big apps that do gig work for nursing. So this is like Uber for nurses. Hospitals are switching over to these in droves. It's getting harder and harder for a nurse to get real employment. They have to go on these gig apps to get a job.
Oh,
And
wow.
these apps are buying publicly available data broker data on credit card debt. And if they think that a nurse has got a large overhang of credit card debt, they offer her less money for the same job on the grounds that she's more desperate and she'll take the job. So these were two things that the FTC was investigating: predatory pricing and surveillance pricing. The guy who took over the agency from Lena Khan, who had been running it under Biden, canceled both of those and instead put all of the organization's emphasis on discovering wokeness and creating like a
Ah.
snitch line where employees can report each other for being too woke. Right. And one of the commissioners there, a guy named Alvaro Bedoya, was like, I go out and I talk to farmers and they complain that John Deere is ripping them off on tractor repair, that the big ag companies are ripping them off on seed and fertilizer, that the big meat processing or wholesaler companies are ripping them off when they sell their crops or their slaughter their animals. None of them has ever told me that the big problem for them is woke. And I don't know what our agency is doing trying to stop woke. What is that? Who does that help? So this feels like a pretty clear-cut example of regulatory capture. I think that there's an analogy here to the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, which
Okay.
is that the Grinch thought that if he stole all the decorations,
Mhm.
that would get rid of Christmas because the decorations are what made people feel Christmassy. And he had
Mm.
it backwards. People put up the decorations because they felt Christmassy and
Yeah.
they could still do Christmas without the decorations. And right now, I think that a lot of these large corporate lobbyists and executives can't conceive of the idea that the reason we have antitrust is because of
Mm.
public sentiment
Right.
and that the government action is downstream of public rage at their behavior. And so they think that if they get rid of the regulators, that they'll get rid of the sentiment. And I think that they're going to be very unpleasantly surprised. I
Yeah.
think that there is that the reason regulators care is because we care and not the other way around.
Mm.
What does tech look like if we don't enforce antitrust,
Mm.
if we can't do these things? What's going to happen? Like printers and ink, and all these things
Sure.
we've
Mhm.
seen. What is the future? Because now we have AI, and it seems a lot more dangerous,
Yeah.
to not be there to take care of antitrust issues.
I think AI is dangerous because it helps you automate processes like paying nurses less if they have credit card debt. Um,
Yeah.
or supercharging bias in lending or housing or child protective services or bail decisions and so on. Um, and I think tech workers by and large get into the field because they have had a personal experience of technology making them more free, and they are very afraid of what happens if technology is used to take away people's freedom. I know my own experience with computers was that, as a kid, I just discovered a whole world out there that was at my fingertips and that, people I could communicate with and things I could do and movements I could be a part of and ideas that I'd never heard before. It was very powerful. And,
Mm.
almost at the same instant that I was experiencing this and feeling really excited about it, I also started to feel that it was really important that everyone get to feel this feeling, right? And I think that some people, a minority of people, the enshittifiers of the world,
Yeah.
saw these computers in the early days or encounter them today, and they just start thinking about how they can scam people with them, how they can lock people in, how they can spy on people, how they can control people, how they can use them adversely to the interests of the people who are at the other side of the keyboard, the screen, and the internet connection.
Mhm.
And tech workers, I think by and large, they're people who want to set people free. And for a long time, tech workers were very powerful because there was so much demand for their services and there weren't enough workers to fill the jobs. And what that meant is that even though there's very low union density in the tech sector, tech workers had an enormous amount of job security and autonomy. And really, like, if your boss told you to break something that you thought shouldn't be broken, you worked your guts out to ship when they're like, now, put a bunch of surveillance and ads and whatever nonsense in it, that you could really tell your boss to F off. And you could do that because there was a guy across the street who'd give you a job that day.
Uh-huh.
And your boss knew it. And your boss also knew that they couldn't hire someone that day to replace you. And so this created an equilibrium where even as competition went away, even as regulation went away, tech workers were really able to hold the line. And tech workers are extremely well placed, all other things being equal, to do a lot to help people, because one characteristic of digital computers that is a little jargony but really important to understand is that the only computer we know how to make is something called the Turing Complete Universal von Neumann machine. And that's just a lot of computer science jargon that means that computers are universal, that every computer can run every program that is valid. So the same programs that run on your singing greeting card will run on the master computer unit of your car, will run on your iPhone, and will run on your thermostat. This is why every 6 months someone's like, I got doomed to run on a singing greeting card, right? Because they're all running, they can all run the same programs. And what that means is that any program that enshittifies something can be disenshittified, right? So, that we can write a scraper that helps you leave Facebook without leaving behind your friends, and that takes your messages into some new social network. We can reverse engineer. There's a couple of guys who reverse engineered the Instagram app and made an app called OG app. And OG app took all of the messages waiting for you, your whole scroll in Instagram, threw away all the suggestions, threw away all the ads, and what was left behind were the messages from the people you followed, which it showed you in reverse chronological order. And it sent no telemetry or surveillance data back to Facebook unless you did something like liking something. Then it would say that you liked it, or
Oh,
if you
wow.
commented, it would send the comment.
I
But it
haven't
didn't
heard of
send.
this. This is
Well,
incredible.
here's the
either.
problem. IP law makes all this stuff illegal. And
Oh.
so within a couple of weeks, OG app had been shut down by Apple and Google, who kicked them out of the App Store, and reverse engineering their devices to allow you to sideload apps without using their App Store is a felony under Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And so what we've seen is the metastasis of IP law. It's really another form of regulatory capture. We think of regulatory capture as ignoring the law, but regulatory capture is also using the law against your enemies, right? Against new market entrants, against competitors. And we have seen the tech sector do both, right? We haven't had a new privacy law in America since 1988, right? The last time America updated its privacy law was to ban video store clerks from telling newspapers which VHS cassettes you have. We haven't had a consumer privacy law since, right? So that's regulatory capture, right? They just get to violate your privacy and no one busts them for it. But
Right.
another piece of regulatory capture is being able to come after you for reverse engineering their apps, for reverse engineering a printer, right? So again, Section 1201 of the DMCA makes it illegal to reverse engineer a printer, to write some software that allows you to unlock the printer so it takes third-party ink. And that's why, like, HP is able to raise the ink to the point where the most expensive fluid you can buy as a consumer is printer ink, right? That colored water costs more per ounce than the semen of a Kentucky Derby winning stallion. And that's what you're printing your grocery list with, right? And so tech workers are the kinds of people who could write that code if it were legal, but it's not. And tech workers used to have power within their firms, but they don't anymore, because we had 260,000 tech layoffs in 2024, or 2023 rather, and 150,000 in 2024. And with more than 400,000 tech workers looking for a job, bosses do not take any lip from their workers anymore. And so, I think this is one of those things where we're going to need tech workers to get their power the way workers mostly do, which is through unions. And yeah, Trump has dismantled the National Labor Relations Board. But again, he's making the Grinch error, because he thinks the reason we have unions is because we have union law. It's the other way around. The way we got union law was by having illegal unions, and with bosses going, well, these illegal wildcat strikes that erupt into spectacular acts of violence, arson, and bloodshed are not good for business. I guess we'll settle for having some union laws so that there's some rules. Trump thinks that he threw away the game. He just threw away the rules. And what that means is that there's just no rules anymore, but the game is still on.
I want to just ask you, I want to ask you this, like the hacker culture, the digital resistance and movement like the EFF, that is Electronic Frontier Foundation, right?
Yes, that's right. I've worked for them for almost 25 years now.
Oh, you have? Wow.
Yes.
Well, they have fought against the surveillance, the corporate control. Have we lost the rebellious spirit of the earlier internet, or do you see new forms of the digital activism?
No, I think that it's alive and well.
Yeah.
And I think that it's, we all got tricked by the platforms, right? It was so
Yeah.
easy to talk to each other on the platforms, and we all joined this great party that they were throwing, and we didn't notice when they locked the doors behind us and then got rid of the fire exits, and then they set them on fire, right? And we are trapped inside a burning Twitter, and we can't escape. And so a lot of the tools that we developed over the last decade for collective action are not useful anymore because they rely on the platforms. They're bootstrapped off the platforms. We're going to have to retool, and it's happening as we speak, right? Legacy social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook are really understood as last year's technology. I think even people who use them understand that they are using the thing that's old, and that the new action is happening on Mastodon and Blue Sky, and on private Discord servers and group chats and so on. And that legacy social media is not fit for purpose. It was always a bit of a mirage, even though it was useful at one point for organizing. It was always brittle, right? That its utility for organizing was based on the willingness of the people who owned it to tolerate your organizing activity. And, they were never trustworthy. They were always visibly untrustworthy, but we just kind of rolled with it because it seemed like a lot of work to do otherwise. And it's very hard to pay attention to how something fails when it's working well.
Yeah.
It's easy not to put on your seatbelt if you've never had a crash. Right?
Yes, that's an
True.
excellent statement.
Yeah.
I think there's that old joke, not much of a joke, that a liberal is a conservative who's been mugged. Well, I think a hacktivist might be an internet user who's gotten stuck on Twitter, and who is just waiting for someone to come along and organize them into a rebellion.
Also, what you said about AI, you sort of said, well, it's not going to turn into a monster and kill us, but the things you said after that are terrifying as well.
Sure.
So
it
doesn't need to turn into a monster and set off nuclear weapons to be an incredibly dangerous pill for our society to swallow.
If you put all of your energy into the imaginary future in which AI doesn't end the human race or might end the human race, and you don't put any regulatory energy into all the ways that AI bros are getting very wealthy by harming people today, then they will get richer. Right? If all of your regulatory energy is focused on things that are not products that the AI companies sell, because they sell products for figuring out who gets bail and whose kids get taken away and who gets a loan and who gets a job, right? There's an element of this even with election disinformation, right? When they say, election disinformation is real, there have been instances of it that are not good and are somewhat frightening, but they don't have an election disinformation product. They do sell a lot of AI services to awful men who want to make pornographic, non-consensual pornographic deepfakes. So to the extent that we focus disproportionately on the things that don't make the money, at the expense of the things that do make the money, like even if you want to stamp out the use of AI for impersonating politicians in sleazy ways to win elections, you have to attack their source of profits, right? Their money is where their power comes from. If you make them poorer, you make them weaker. And when they are weaker, you can address these other things that are pissing you off too. And so we need to train our fire on the harms that they make that are most profitable, because that is how we tackle them. It's just like if you go to one of those like personal finance websites, they'll say, take the credit card that has the most debt and pay that one off first, and then pay off the next one and the next one. You have to prioritize. You have to lever up your action so that you get the most bang for your buck when you're attacking rampant monopoly capitalism. Hit them in the pocketbook.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really, really good point. That makes sense. I mean, it does.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no.
But it is hard. There is also, I think, a barrier to entry in terms of understanding, especially when people are just living life. And unlike Caroline and I are, and you, but the three of us are spending many, many hours a day researching this stuff. And it's complex. Whereas like Standard Oil is not quite as complex. So,
well, sure. I also think that there is a degree of performative complexity. I think that there is, people who, want you to think that this is so hard to understand that you can never make sense of it. Like I see this a lot in debates about economics. So economists have all these equations and they have a lot of theory, and they talk about how there are like natural prices that occur, through complex market dynamics, and that, you can model this and figure out what the prices are and so on, and what the costs are to make things. And, there isn't really a physics of human commerce, right? That's just nonsense. Like, here's the bottom line. The more money there is that goes to the boss, the less money there is for workers and for customers. And so if bosses have more power than customers and workers, then the products will on average cost more and the workers will on average make less money. And when workers have more power, if consumers don't have power, the bosses have to share with workers, and they charge consumers more. So in New York, the gig platforms were forced to pay a surcharge to their workers to give them a living wage, and they pass that surcharge on to their customers. And when customers have power but workers don't have power, so like Walmart or Amazon, prices go down, and the way that bosses keep their take up is by suppressing wages. But when consumers and workers have power, then prices go down because the investors eat shit, and the workers and the consumers split the benefit. And so this is a question about power. It is entirely a question about power. The idea that there is like an empirical way to figure out what the right price is, as opposed to an exercise in power, in politics, that results in the prices and wages that are set across our society, it's just nonsense. And I think that it's true that there are some specifics of AI, but a lot of it is, I think, just there to bamboozle you. It's just performative complexity, like those gambling apps, sports betting apps. They will let you make the most crazy proposition bets, right? Such and such is going to score 2 or more goals in the first half of this game, but only if it's raining or something. And anytime you see someone who's an odds maker who has added complexity to a proposition bet, the reason for that extra complexity is to make it hard for you to calculate the odds in your head and know whether you're making a good bet. If you've ever, like one time I was at the big hacker conference in Vegas, DEF CON, and I don't gamble because my dad's a mathematician. So I just I'm just enjoying what is obviously not a way to lose money, either slowly or quickly. But I stopped at a craps table, and I asked the croupier, how does craps work? And he walked me through all the different lines on the craps table and how they pay out. I was like, oh, every one of these lines is there to make it hard to figure out whether you're making a good bet. right? The entire raison d'etre of the craps table is to make it hard for you to figure out what a good bet is. I mean, there is no great bet on the craps table, but there are better and worse bets, and they change based on the kind of play you're in. And the reason for that complexity is to increase the house edge, because it's very hard to do those sums in your head as you're playing, especially if they're giving you free cocktails because you're betting heavy. And so I
Yeah.
think a lot of the difficulty we have in understanding subjects that are making rich people richer
Mhm.
is there on purpose. And anytime you hear an economist give you an explanation of something and you think about it for 10 minutes and you realize that what they're really saying is actually your boss is right and you shouldn't be angry, or your landlord is right, you know you're being bamboozled, right? They
Mhm.
found a fancy way to say, actually, you deserve to be poor.
I like that.
I like that too.
For
Wow.
performative
Yeah.
Complexity.
complexity. I like that. It's very good.
We really want to ask you real quick. Can you please tell us about free our feeds? We are very interested in this. It's a GoFundMe too. Can you say it like that? I mean, explain
Sure.
what it is, because it's a
Crowdfunder.
great thing.
Yeah, I should say that I am not a founder of Free Our Feeds, and I'm not
Mhm.
very involved with it. I just put my name on it. They asked me if I
Okay.
would endorse it, and I looked at it and I said yes. So
Yeah.
Free Our Feeds, it's run by people I trust. There's a couple of people involved who I think are good folks who are running this thing. It is a nonprofit project to raise money to do a bunch of work that needs to be done with next generation social media, primarily Blue Sky, but also Mastodon. So there's
Mhm.
just gaps in how these things work. The part that really interests me is standing up a new Blue Sky server. So Blue
Mhm.
Sky, by design, is supposed to be what's called federatable. It's like email, right? Where you can have more than one server and they can talk to each other. And we were talking about that before with Mastodon, where you can just leave one server and go to another one. Same way you can leave T-Mobile and go to Verizon. And there's only one Blue Sky server. There are other servers run by third parties that do parts of what Blue Sky does, like help you with content moderation and so on. But you can't, like, if Blue Sky fires you as a user, you can't set up shop somewhere else and start talking to the people who are there. Or if Blue Sky makes a call you don't like,
Right.
there have been a couple of those lately where users have joined that other users didn't like because of their views being, transphobic or racist or hateful. And they felt that Blue Sky should just not let those people on the platform. And Blue Sky made calls that they didn't like, but the choice was, either you stay on Blue Sky and continue to talk to all the people you like there, or you quit Blue Sky, but you can't go somewhere else, but continue to talk to the people who stay behind. And I think
Hmm.
that leaves Blue Sky in a position where it's easy for them to do the wrong thing, right? The
Yeah.
investors know that they can fire the CEO and replace the CEO with a new CEO who will make things worse for users, and users won't have anywhere to go.
Yeah.
And I think that the CEO might be able to talk herself into doing the wrong thing because she knows this as well. I don't know her personally, Jay Graber. She seems like a really nice person. We've met a couple of times. I don't think she's got a malicious bone in her body. But I also have watched lots of founders of companies sit down and say, well, my investors have said that unless I do this thing that is quite bad for our users, they're going
Mhm.
to fire the 150 friends who I convinced to quit their jobs and come work for me. And I'm going to be out of a job and they're going to be out of a job, and no one will be around to fight for those users who are going to be harmed by this decision. And so I'm going to go ahead and do it. Right. And actually that makes me a good guy, because everyone's going to hate me for this and they won't understand that I'm doing it to be to be a good guy. I'm going to take the hit for this. And like, aren't
Yeah.
I noble for making this, wonderful self-sacrifice, right? So I've
Mm.
seen people make that call. It's harder to make that call if you know that your users will just all leave the minute you do it.
Yeah.
And so the problem with the Blue Sky architecture is that to stand up another Blue Sky server, unlike Mastodon, where you can stand one up for about $5 in the cloud, a Blue Sky server requires a huge amount of engineering and resources. And partly that's because no one's applied themselves to the problem of reducing the amount of resources and engineering needed to do this. There isn't like a tool chain for it and so on. And partly it's a design problem and a protocol problem. And no one is involved in, at the protocol level, arguing for changes to the protocol that'll make it easier to set up another Blue Sky server. And so that's what Free Our Feeds is doing. They're setting up
Mhm.
another Blue Sky server, but they're also organizing to be part of the protocol design team, because it's an open protocol, which means that it's designed in a standards body And so anyone who participates can have a say in how it's designed.
Mm.
And to create the tooling needed to stand up a new server, to modify the protocol to make it easier to set up a new server, and to set up the new server so there's at least one other place users can go. And I'm made this comparison before. I think this is like having a fire exit, right?
Yeah.
It's great to have a great party, and the party's great right up to the moment the club catches fire, and then not having a fire exit is a really big deal.
Yeah.
And when you don't have a fire exit, you invite sociopaths to commit acts of arson. I really worry that Blue Sky has failed to do either the engineering work needed to make it easier to stand up a Blue Sky server, or the kind of community development work that would lead to people enduring the expense to set up a Blue Sky server, a rival Blue Sky server.
Mhm.
And that in so doing, they have created a very good party with something like 25 million users that has no fire exits. And I think that they are inviting their venture capitalists to commit horrible acts of arson as a result.
Mom,
Yeah.
well said.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we are going to end by saying bye, picks and shovels.
Okay.
Buy picks
Buy
and
it.
shovels. Do it. Yeah,
Well,
that's
we really
wonderful.
appreciate it. And I have to say that, in the internet is crack, which is Caroline and I, but
Right.
we definitely feel that your energy, sentiment, and philosophical beliefs are definitely, in line with what we feel, and
Yeah.
we're glad
Oh, thank
that
you.
you were good enough to come on and articulate some of those. Really appreciate
Well,
it.
I really appreciate it as well. And I really appreciate the chance to come and talk to your viewers and listeners.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for being here.
I'll talk to you later.
Thank you for watching or listening to The Internet is Crack. Tune in next week when we have another great conversation about robotics, AI, and the internet. You can watch us or listen to us on YouTube or Spotify or many other outlets. And don't forget to follow us on social media. See you next Monday.